In 1991, there was a movie that came out, and our daughter absolutely forbade me from seeing it. And anyone of you who knows our daughter knows that's completely in character. And anyone who knows me knows that that's completely within my character to say, okay, I won't see it. But as truth would have it, I was traveling a lot that year on business. They show movies on the airplane. It so happened that this movie was showing on the airplane, and I ended up seeing it. The movie was Father of the Bride. And for those of you who saw the movie and who remember it from those years, you probably can imagine why Allie didn't want me to see it. The movie starred Steve Martin as his father who got surprised by his daughter who just came back from studying abroad, and she was all excited, and they sat down for a family dinner that they hadn't had in a long time. The daughter announces during dessert, "Dad, I'm getting married." And George Banks, who Steve Martin played, had a big problem with that. Not because he didn't like the groom. It's more because he had a lot of difficulty making the transition that obviously his daughter had already made and that she was ready to make. And I won't go through the whole movie, but those of you who remember it know that George thought that he'd have a lot of say in the wedding, and like most of us who have been fathers of the bride, that is not exactly the case. The wedding takes place at their house. There are a couple of hundred people there. And and George has a lot of details to attend to, one of which is that the parking in the neighborhood didn't work out, so George ended up finding himself during the reception parking cars. And then he realizes something. He realizes that he never got a chance to say what he wanted to say to his daughter. And so the whole last part of the movie is George chasing all around the house, trying to catch up with her. He finally gets to the living room, she's just left. He gets into the dining room, she's just left. He's looking all over for her. Finally, he gets outside just as the bride and groom have entered the car and are pulling away. And for all of us who didn't know what was coming next, we thought, poor George. He hasn't had a chance to say what he wanted to say to his daughter. So in the final scene, George and his wife are sitting in the living room looking at the carnage that had been caused by the couple hundred people, and all of a sudden the phone rings. And as you might guess, it's his daughter. George picks up the phone. She says, "Dad, I just wanted to say I love you." So how do we make a transition from that to Parshat Eikev? Whether or not I do a good job of that, I'll leave to you. But the children of Israel, as I alluded to before, were standing on the banks of the Jordan River. I'm sure they're excited. They've been wandering the desert for 40 years, and in 40 years, as we know, it wasn't enough time, as Mike pointed out a few weeks ago. If you do the math, 40 years wasn't enough time for all of that generation to have been gone, but certainly it was enough time for leadership changes to have taken place. And I'm talking not just Joshua coming on as a leader in place of Moshe, but just leadership changes within the tribes, within families. There was a new generation, and this generation didn't know defeat. As we learned in our Torah reading, God had to remind them, look, you guys weren't the ones that were responsible for all these military victories we had. It was me, it was God. They didn't know the hardship. They didn't know what their ancestors of 40 years ago had gone through, and going hungry before manna came, or going thirsty before Moses struck the rock, even though he was supposed to talk to it. They hadn't gone through all those hardships. They were excited. They saw the new land, and just like a bride and groom ready to get married, they weren't really in the mood to listen, with all due respect. And here's Moses with these 5 sermons trying to impart to the children of Israel everything that had been told to them, everything that they had been instructed to do during their wanderings. And I see Neil here. I should tell you that I've never forgotten the Devar Torah that you had. I don't think it was this Parsha, but it might have been Bamidbar, where you analogized it to your daughter going off to college, and this is what I'd like to tell you. That has stuck with me ever since. And it's very much the same scene. Moshe is standing in front of the children of Israel, and he says, look, this is what I want to tell you. I say, yeah, we get it. And if one reads this Parsha, or any of the Parsha we have covered, and I didn't mean Bamidbar, I meant Devarim, that we've covered in Devarim, one can take it on a surface level and say, oh my God, it's a re-recitation of almost the whole 613, okay? It's every single commandment. And if you do a surface reading of it, you think, I've got to do all this stuff. And certainly the children of Israel weren't ready to hear all that. And as I alluded to during our Torah reading, there was a lot of fire and brimstone, frankly. But interspersed with this is this concept of love. Constantly throughout this Parsha, you see the word ahava, or derivations of it. Last week we were introduced to it too. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And I was impressed by the fact of two things. One, the first statement of that paragraph was you should love your God. And two is that it started out with heart. And we have the same thing here in this Parsha as well. And there's a little bit of a problem I had, if not a whole lot of a problem I had, with reconciling those two things. How, on the one hand, do we have all this fire and brimstone about how you shall do this, you shall do that, and not just the request that you love God, the absolute commandment that you love God? That's difficult to reconcile. How do you love someone that you've been commanded to love? And that remained a problem for me until I saw one verse in this Parsha that brought it all together, where God is attributed as saying, I have disciplined these people as a father would discipline his son. And then I understood. There are other analogies of love that we have with God that I still have problems reconciling. Just last week we heard Rabbi Spitz say that the book of Devarim is a love letter to the Jewish people. I sort of get that, but I have to admit I don't completely get it. We just announced the month of Elul, and there are a lot of you who know that if you take the letters that spell out Elul, it's thought by the rabbis to stand for Ani l'dodi v'dodi li. I am for my beloved, and my beloved is for me. Very appropriate this Shabbat. But still, I had a problem with that. I've never really related to that as an analogy. But the analogy I can relate to is God as Father. And when you think back to the problems that George had in wanting to impart final things to his daughter, and you think about the problem that Moses had in trying to impart things to the children of Israel, you start to get it. In a Devar Torah related to last week's Parsha that Rabbi Elliot Dorff wrote, he too was dealing with this reconciliation. How do we deal with this? And he said, this apparent contradiction between commanding us to love and at the same time expressing that, gee, I'd like you to love me, is really God acknowledging to us, I mean, God knew, but he was acknowledging to us that he knew, and we should know it too, that we're a complex people. We were given the right to decide. We were given the right to choose our own path. God, if you look at it, laid out several paths that we can choose, but we are all individuals. We were made that way. It is within our DNA to choose our own path. If you think about why we're all here today, some of us are here today because it's the natural rhythm of Shabbat. And some of us are here today because we feel we were commanded to be here today and it was the right thing to do. But some of us were here today simply because we wanted to be with friends and family. Some of us are here today because we wanted to enjoy the solitude, if you will, the relative quietness of Shabbat, not necessarily in a spiritual vein, just in a psychological vein of being here as opposed to in the everyday work world. Some of us are here because we're here to celebrate a simcha. Some of us are here because it seemed to be a really cool thing to do when you've been giving sole responsibility for your granddaughters today. By the way, you've been very good. There are a lot of reasons, and they are all valid because we're here. We're on a path. We're not pursuing a path of the whole 613 mitzvot, and maybe that's never been our objective. But we are on a path to goodness. We are on a path to being better people. We're on a path to enriching our lives and the lives of our family and the life of this congregation, and of Judaism, and who knows, the whole world. And that's how I can reconcile it. Between the fire and brimstone on the one hand and the expression of love on the other hand, is to say, look, I know you are all different. I know you're going to have flaws. And I would say to you, too, that as we announce Elul and start getting ready for the high holidays, and we reach Yom Kippur, and we start clapping for all the things we've done, I would take a little different approach to it, to say, yeah, Dad, I know I've been bad. I know I haven't done these things. But at my core, I'm a good person. And by the way, thank you for allowing me to reach special birthdays, and thank you for allowing me to see my kids get married. Thank you for allowing me to be here this Shabbat. There's a lot to be thankful for. There's a lot to be proud of what we all exist to be in this world. And so this is a very, very meaningful time of year. But it's all too easy to misread what we are reading here. We should understand that we do have complexities, and we should live with those complexities. There are some of those complexities we absolutely should seek to improve. But there's a lot of them that make this world a truly great place.